So we're moving into the module on praxis, thinking about imagining your life beyond the university and the classroom, and then into the next unit where we begin to prototype jobs and careers. And so we've kind of been exploring, in one way or another, sort of the written communication and reasoning and general knowledge skills that you've gotten through your general ed at EWU and then into your major requirements. We sort of took a look at your understanding of basic anthropology and how the development of anthropology has related to the historical context, particularly here in the United States. Um, and then we're sort of moving, into this idea of applying anthropological knowledge, bringing us to this idea of kind of life beyond the classroom, applying anthropology to the things that you care about, being able to develop your own kind of philosophy of anthropology, your own research, and the ability to reflect upon that as a part, right, of anthropology generally. And that's what we want to do. We want you to get a little bit of better understanding about your education, at least the ability to reflect upon it, how it relates to your life and to you as a person, and sort of this question, right, of where you're headed next. What are the next steps for you? So practicing anthropology, it's part of a course, although I don't think it's been taught in the last few years at Eastern, and we have been kind of scattering it throughout our curriculum. But one way of thinking about the idea of practicing anthropology or the practice of anthropology is simply by thinking back to this notion of the knowledge of anthropology, the general knowledge of anthropology. And once we start thinking like this, we're actually in a really ancient dichotomy, if you will, between, on the one hand, what you might call pure knowledge, a kind of abstract set of ideas, and practice, this thing that we're calling practice. We can go back to Greek philosophy to see this kind of juxtaposition and this difference in concepts. For the Greek philosophers, for example, pure knowledge, true knowledge, was a kind of theoretical reflection. It was a description of the world, but more so, it was an explanation of that world. It was a prediction of future events based on that kind of abstract understanding. And it was associated really with the academy as we think of, let's say, our university, the original, right, academy in the Western tradition. Knowledge came out of the classroom. It came out of the text, right, that would be utilized and so on through the use of one's logical reasoning. And so, in this sense, we're talking about practice as sort of something that traditional Greek philosophers thought of as not knowledge itself, as something distinct from knowledge. Practice was the utilization for particular concrete purposes a knowledge base. So they really are a different kind of understanding. One is the set of ideas. If you think back to earlier in this quarter, we talked about the kind of development of anthropological knowledge through time, the different theories and so on. And that in its sort of accumulation could be thought of as the knowledge of anthropology. But the things that I do with anthropology and the things that you do with anthropology, the things that take us beyond theory, the thing that take us beyond, right, using a method to develop a theory is known as practice. And the practice of anthropology can involve schools and universities. So it absolutely can be done in a school or university. I have done the practice of anthropology with my colleagues here at Eastern when we did a assessment of a community center here in Spokane, assess the community center's provision of services to the community, think about ways that might be improved and so on. So this is something that absolutely can be in a school or university, and a lot of the work that I've done has been practical to some extent. It's had this feature of doing practice, even though I appreciate and respect the pure knowledge, right, of anthropology. Practice of anthropology is equally as important, but it's sort of not as well emphasized, focused upon, considered, because it's often involved with those sites that are really not as high status, if you will, as the university itself. These community groups, different kinds of non governmental organizations, government, um, it's associated with institutions that are not really traditionally anthropological in that sense, especially if you think about this American academic anthropology, four-field anthropology, and the way that it got situated right in universities, primarily as a training. But the training was absolutely about achieving practitioners, people that would not just be creating more theory and method, but which would be taking what we already know, the great knowledge, right, we have of humanity, the great knowledge we have of biology and culture, and then they would take it out of the university and bring it into that world and start applying it to things, right? Start integrating it into all of the different community activities, non-governmental activities, and governmental activities. And it is something that traditionally we have done a poor job at as part of our training. But it's important. As we look back, that was a part of the original vision for what we would be doing with the anthropological sort of theories of human behavior and human being, that it wouldn't just stay as an idea, it just wouldn't stay as a text or a book, right? But that it would move beyond that into the world and inform the kinds of policy decisions and so on that the world is needing. So if we start thinking about the practice of anthropology, it does take things such as, let's say, knowledge of cultural relativism, some basic knowledge of human biology, knowledge of human social organization, and so on. It takes that kind of knowledge. It takes the skills we might talk about of things like interviewing, of rapid assessment, let's say, and so on, some of the things that get taught in anthropology programs, but it goes beyond them. So when we're talking about the practice of anthropology, it's sort of those kind of easily recognizable as anthropological skills and knowledge. But beyond that, so when we're doing a community assessment here in Spokane, or I am doing a social assessment in China, I am drawing on such a huge range of skills, from lots of soft skills, people skills, let's say, in dealing with this huge range of for example, I'm thinking about my work in China with international conservation organizations and the Chinese government, right, and local ethnic minority communities. It takes a lot of holding meetings and dialogue and getting people to kind of see things from each other's perspectives. It takes a lot of skills that are kind of beyond the participant observation, um, cultural relativism, evolution, right? Some of the basic concepts and methods, let's say, within our field. Those will be utilized, but there's this plus to it, right? That the practice of anthropology is actually a humongous skill set. Some of these skills we develop through the practice of anthropology. That is, it's not contained within any one course or any one area of anthropology, but it comes out of, right, training as an anthropologist and then beginning to problem solve like an anthropologist, that there's all these other skills, right, in actually solving problems, bringing some kind of problem to its amelioration, that is a fascinating part of the practice of anthropology. And I think this is something that you're going to see now as you prepare to kind of close your books, close the period of your BA education, right, and kind of go out into the world with these new knowledges and skills and what you do with them. So one of the things that I want to bring to your attention in the discussions about practice is the notion of the pure anthropology, and if we can, we might think about pure anthropology almost in terms of kind of like objectivity. You sometimes hear these discussions about objectivity. And pure your anthropology in terms of our knowledge and our skills and so on seems to be distinct from things like values, right? What we hold important. But I think once we begin to explore practice of anthropology, and we begin to think about how you all, as well as let's say myself and my colleagues, use anthropology, what we actually do with it, um, beyond like how to contribute to anthropology, how to grow theory, or how to make a new, methodological innovation and so on. There's this kind of issue of, well, okay, but when we do leave the classrooms and we leave the books behind, and we leave the kind of internal discussions in anthropology, and we start seeing the world around us and how anthropology might have a role in that world, it's really all about what is important to you, what your values are, what the kind of big goals that you have for yourself in life. You may have come to anthropology, right, with some sense of your own values and what you thought was important. So one of the things that I think, as we've been talking, many of us have an appreciation for cultural diversity that in some ways probably predates our first anthropology classes. We have some value of that led us to anthropology. We may deepen it with our knowledge in anthropology and so on. But we have this kind of sense, okay, this is something important to me, and thus I'm interested in anthropology because it theorizes that and gives us ways to understand it and to study it. But values are complex and they're plural, and we hold multiple groups of values. And so kind of this module is also starting to ask you to build on your sense of identity and who you are, but like what's important to you and what do you really want to apply anthropology to in this world as you are now finishing? What are the kinds of things that you think are valuable and important and that you want to do with anthropology? You want to practice anthropology in this way to achieve this particular kind of goal to you, to kind of realize a value that you yourself have. So this unit's reading is sort of exploring this kind of idea of an anthropologist who's been trained in theories and methods and disciplinary history and so on, who has a unique take on the discipline, who really comes at it, as a very individual kind of voice. And then they begin to think about what's important to them, right? Their values. They begin to kind of synthesize the discipline with what they see as important in the world. For the authors, right, anthropology is about making a difference in the broader world. They advocate using anthropology to critique false assumptions about people. They talk about anthropology as a way of envisioning an alternative world of less suffering. And I think if you read the required reading closely, you will see this kind of personal reflection, right, on our own assumptions. That is, the false assumptions that we may hold about people through time, but also our dreams in the kinds of values, love and compassion and hope and so on that the authors have, right, that they take that anthropology and in their practice, they begin to dream with it, right, to imagine this better world. So to kind of conclude, this lecture has talked about the differences between knowledge, or the abstract, pure knowledge, ideas, let's say. And I think that is best illustrated by the notion of theory, this kind of idea of theoretical reflection rather than practical activity. As we kind of move out of basic knowledge and move out of your personal perspective, let's say that's in your head, now we begin to think about how you're going to practice the discipline moving forward. This is why we've been talking about the notion of practice and the notion of practicing anthropology. The reality is most of the students that come through the anthropology program will end up working in various forms of employment, various kinds of careers that may not have any immediate connection to anthropology, but it's which someone like yourself, other students, They have things that are important to them. They have things that they want to achieve, and they take what they've learned in our program through the coursework of this BA, and then they put it to work, right? They put it to practice. They begin to practice what they have learned in anthropology. And I think one of the key points, one of the key takeaways from today's lecture is that this is often done through that reflection on their values. And in our reading, in our example for this unit, right, is this idea of imagining a better world. That as we begin to close our books, right, as we begin to leave the classrooms, as we begin to move off and away from our campus, you're going to be in the bigger and broader world. And the unit of the course that we're looking at now is, what are you going to do with anthropology in that world? What are your values, and how do you see yourself putting anthropology to work